Okay, so what we're going to be doing is using the PERT reference sheet to solve the one-step equations. And this is one step number 3 sheets that you can look for in the worksheets section. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to number these. This is what the rules we're going to use. Okay, and we're going to go about doing this the same way. So this is the number 2 rule. This is the number 2, uses the number 2 rule, uses the number 2 rule. This is the number 1 rule, number 1 rule, number 2 rule, number 3 rule, number 1 rule, number 1 rule, and 3 rule. Okay. So let's go ahead. What we're going to use is we're going to use the number 2 rule to solve this. So if a number is not connected to a letter, add or subtract with the opposite sign to both sides. So what we're going to do is our goal is to get the letter on one side by itself. So in this case, this is the letter. So we have to get this 6 onto the other side. Using the number 2 rule, we're going to subtract that number to both sides. Okay? And so we got negative 12 and negative 6. Because they're 2 negatives, they're going to make the situation higher. So we're going to go 18, negative 18 equals A. And that's the answer. Because 6 minus 6, it cancels it out. Okay, so let's give another example of the number 2. The number 2 rule. So we want to get the letter all by itself. So we're going to go negative 4 minus 4. And we're going to have negative 13 equals, and that negative 4 goes away. And then we got negative 13. Okay. And then let's go to the number 3. Same thing. We're going to get D by itself. We're going to go negative 5 minus 5. Minus 4 and minus 5 is minus 9. Okay. If you have forgotten the rules of how to do this, adding and subtracting signs, that's what we're doing here. We're adding and subtracting signs. If we have 2 negatives, we're going to sum both numbers together and the sign stays the same. If we want to have 1 negative and 1 positive, we get the difference between the 2 numbers and the larger number sign wins. Okay. All right, so moving down to number 4, we're going to use rule number 1. So let's go to rule number 1. Our goal is still to get the letter on one side by itself. If a number is connected to a letter, divide by that number and keep the sign the same. So what we're going to do is divide by that 4 on both sides. How many times does 4 go into 32? Let's do the inverse of that. What times 4 is 32? 4 times 8 is 32. So here we know S is 8. Now, is it a negative or is it a positive? Okay, on this one, we're dividing, right? So we're going to look under this sign. We're multiplying and dividing signs. So now we're dividing, and we have 1 positive and one negative and 1 positive number. So that final answer has to be a negative. Okay, so we're just going to circle that, and we're going to circle that. Okay, number 5. We're going to do another one of those. What are we going to do? Our job is to get the letter by itself, so we're going to divide by 3. Okay, if you don't like dividing, you ask the question, what times 3 is 27? Okay. And on the ACT, we always can use your calculator. So if you don't want to do it in your head, you can do it on the calculator. But I do it in my head, so I'm going to do times 9. So our answer is 9. So F equals 9. And the 2 positives, so it's going to stay positive. So it's F equals 9. Okay. So number 6, we're going to use the number 3 rule. If the letter is part of a fraction, multiply the denominator to the opposite side. So what I like to do is I like to just make this sign right here. I just circle those 2. So what's 7 times 10? Negative 10. So that was H equals negative 70. Okay. And here we're going to go back to the number 1 rule. We got to, now, in this case, remember, if a number is connected to the letter, divide by that number and keep the sign the same. You got to keep that sign the same, so you got to do -3 to both sides. And if we're dividing, we got 2 negatives, it's going to equal a positive because we got a -27 divided by -3, so that's a positive 9v. Okay. We're going to go back and do the number 1 rule again. So it's -5, -5, and then so n equals, now we got a negative and a positive, it's going to be a -8. Okay. This one we're going to circle this because we're using the number 3. Remember the number 3 rule, we circle the denominator to the opposite side. Okay, so what we're going to do, is we're going to times those 2 together, and that is 72. So it'd be -72 equals y. And then the final one, we're going back to number 2 rule. We got to get that letter all by itself. So we're going to go -3, -3, r equals -9. Okay. Now, if you want to go ahead and get more practice, we have other one-step equation worksheets that you can work on.